Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate you yielding the time and being willing to stick around with me this afternoon. I have a great pleasure this afternoon, and that is to talk about successes that we've had together. I was down on the floor earlier. We were debating the rule. I was talking to my Democratic colleagues on the Rules Committee about the good work that was going on in the Rules Committee, the good work that was going on the House floor. In fact, we brought the bill. It was a raucous debate, Mr. Speaker. You will remember it. We argued for an hour about all sorts of extraneous things. Then we brought the bill down, and it passed, I believe, unanimously here on the floor of the House just a few minutes ago. I don't understand that. I just don't understand what those drivers are in politics, Mr. Speaker, that encourage us to tear folks down and instead of build folks up. And that's why I want to talk about some successes today. You can't see my slides, Mr. Speaker, but I've got some numbers written down the left in red, and those are the numbers that are worth paying attention to. 28. 28 is the number of bills President Trump has signed into law in his first 100 days. 28. That's more bills signed into law than any other American president since Harry Truman. More bills. Now, I read the same newspapers you read, Mr. Speaker. I listen to the same news broadcasts you listen to. I hear folks talk about inaction. I hear folks talk about confusion. I hear folks talk about division. I don't hear folks talking about success. And success is what marks these first 100 days. Again, more legislative activity than any other president and Congress, collaboratively Congress, House, Senate, Republicans, Democrats, more legislative success than we've had in any Congress and White House combination since Harry Truman. First, Mr. Speaker, first Supreme Court confirmation the first 100 days since 1881. Since 1881. Now, it is with no joy that I share with you that the Supreme Court is such a powerful institution, Mr. Speaker. I think too often we fail to get the job done legislatively, and the court steps in and legislates from right across the street. That wasn't the job the Constitution envisioned. That wasn't the job assigned in Article 3, but it is the job that's been taken on by default. So it's become increasingly important that we make sure the court is staffed. I supported the Senate having hearings on the Garland nomination last cycle. I supported the Senate having hearings on the Gorsuch nomination this cycle. Decision after decision in the last session went 4-4, which meant we could sustain the underlying court's decision, but we couldn't decide these important questions that were still a source of confusion across this country. We now have a fully staffed Supreme Court again. First time since 1881 we've seen a Supreme Court confirmation in the first 100 days of a new administration. 17, Mr. Speaker. 17 years since illegal border crossings reached this low level. I'm going to come back to that. But what I'm saying is that words matter. And what the president has said is we're going to grow the most robust economy the world has ever seen, but we're going to do it with a legal visa program that makes sure folks are coming and going in accordance with U.S. law. And simply that change in attitude, Mr. Speaker, simply that change in attitude from we're going to ignore the law to the law matters has brought illegal crossings down to a 17-year low. 728, Mr. Speaker. That is the number of millions of dollars saved with the president's first foray into cutting federal budgets. His first foray into cutting federal budgets, he started taking a look at federal contracts. Can you imagine, Mr. Speaker, what it's like to be a new president of the United States, particularly one that doesn't come out of a legislative or government tradition? Everything is new as it comes to the content. But what's not new is so much of the process. The president's been looking at contracts his entire life, Mr. Speaker. The president's been negotiating contracts his entire life. He took a look at the beginnings of the Pentagon contracts and said, by golly, we can do better for the American people. $728 million on project number 1 saved for the American taxpayer. Which brings us to number 16, Mr. Speaker. And that's 16 years since consumer confidence in this country has been as high as it is today. I enjoy traveling across the district, Mr. Speaker, and I'm talking to folks. We're a divided community, like every community is in the country. Some folks believe one thing, some folks believe another. Generally, we are united on issues, but sometimes we're divided on issues. And voter after voter after voter says, Rob, I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I feel like we're going to have opportunity. Opportunity. 16 years since consumer confidence has reached this high of a level. Now, with that increase in confidence, Mr. Speaker, comes an incredible obligation on the 435 of us to deliver. This isn't confidence that's based on nothing happening. This is confidence based on something happening. We have real obligations to fulfill those promises, those commitments that we all made during the last election cycle. I think we have the men and women in this chamber who can do it. But it's been 16 years since the American people believed that we did. I want to put those border crossings in perspective, Mr. Speaker. 61% decline in President Trump's first 100 days. Now, I come from Georgia. We've got a robust agricultural economy in Georgia. And I tell my constituents day in and day out, if you're not going to raise your son or daughter to pick carrots in South Georgia, if you don't aspire for your son or daughter to be the very best cabbage picker that we have in the state of Georgia, if you are not aspiring to be part of that agricultural economy and help us get crops out of the field, we're going to need somebody who is aspiring to do that hard work, and it is hard work, Mr. Speaker. Well, if we can agree that these aren't jobs that American citizens are losing, these are jobs that are adding to the American economy, then we need a legal visa program to let folks come in, to let folks go out. I went on a bipartisan CODEL, Mr. Speaker. Bipartisan CODEL, Republicans, Democrats traveling together to El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, talking with families. You remember the women and children crisis there, unaccompanied minors coming across the border. I talked to family after family, and they said, Rob, listen, I don't want to be an American citizen. I don't want to go to America. I don't want to be in America. I'm happy here at home. But Dad, or my husband, he generally travels to America during the growing season, during the construction season, and turns around and comes back home when that season is over. Well, you all are getting so tough on your border security, you're not handing out legal visas to do this work, that now my husband or my dad can't come back home when the growing season is over. So now we're all picking up and we're trying to get into America too so the family can stay together. Well, that makes perfectly good sense to me if you were that family. It makes no sense if you're the American taxpayer. You recognize that you have jobs that need to be filled. You recognize you have skills that you're not training your children to fulfill, and you don't want to change the visa program to make that happen. The president is committed to growing the economy. We know that's going to mean legal access in and out of the country. 61% drop in illegal border crossings in the first 100 days. Tell you what else that means, Mr. Speaker. That means instead of our Border Patrol men and women working that border under very difficult conditions, instead of our law enforcement, instead of all of the instruments of Homeland Security that we have in this country being focused on families crossing the border, with a 61% decline in this human trafficking across the border, law enforcement can now focus on the real security issues to this country, to the drugs crossing the border, to the weapons crossing the border. Forbid the thought to weapons of mass destruction crossing the border. Tremendously important accomplishment here in the first 100 days. So much more that we'll be able to do together. Mr. Speaker, 25 Iranian entities sanctioned by the Trump administration the first 100 days. That's what we did together in this chamber. You'll remember, Mr. Speaker. We passed the Iranian sanctions language in a bipartisan way to send the word to the leaders of Iran that while we have great respect for your citizenry, we cannot tolerate a nuclear Iran. We do not trust you to be a member of the League of Nations with nuclear capabilities. And the answer is no as you pursue those very dangerous dreams. Well, you'll remember President Obama negotiated a deal with the international community and with the Iranians. I wish he hadn't, but he did. We had sanctions. Those sanctions are now gone. Iran is pursuing very much the same path that I would have expected them to pursue, given the deal that was negotiated. And the world continues to be a dangerous place. Well, we have rules on the books today, laws on the books today, that allow the government, in consultation with the Congress, in cooperation with the Congress, based on statutes passed by the Congress, to get involved unilaterally as the United States of America in trying to prevent a nuclear Iran. 25 different entities identified by this administration as helping the Iranian government to pursue those dangerous and illegal nuclear goals sanctioned and reined in. It's going to make a difference. It's going to make a difference to national security. It's going to make a difference to international security. 18 billion, Mr. Speaker. You can't see this slide, but already in 4 months on the job, 4 months in cooperation with this Congress, we've seen $18 billion saved through the elimination of red tape. I don't mean $18 billion, it's a one-time deal, Mr. Speaker. I mean $18 billion annually in wasteful compliance costs erased by this administration, and again, often in cooperation and consultation with Congress. When I go back and tell you that this president has signed more bills into law than any president since Harry Truman in cooperation with this Congress, I'm talking about many of the bills that did exactly this, cutting red tape, saving the American taxpayer money. Those bills, very often, were brought through the Congressional Review Act process. That's a process, as you know, Mr. Speaker, that allows the Congress to take a look at the regulations that the administration promulgates. We pass the laws, the administration writes the regs, we get to go back and look at the regs to make sure they represent the true intent of the legislation. Well, in many instances so far this year, Mr. Speaker, in fact, in more instances than any other time in American history, we've decided that those regulations do not reflect the intent of Congress. In fact, often they are running directly contrary to the intent of Congress. We've eliminated those $18 billion annually in savings to the American taxpayer.